Yeah,
I don't know.
I got interested in the. I'm trying to avoid the like nuts and bolts UFO stuff, you know.
Yeah.
There was some U.S. Congress members talking about UFOs being angels, which is weird because like on one side you've got the conversation over materials, right, that are left over and that can be like back engineered, which these folks are part of that conversation. And then at the same time you've got like the angel demon mythos kind of surrounding it. And I'm really curious how does that work? Like, how does, is it really like they honestly think that we're getting there's a Skywatch TV has a term Beasttech, which genetic engineering and some digital and AI components in that are labeled Beasttech. And I wonder if that, is that what the materials would be then? If it was a demon, would an angel leave material? It's just kind of like a weird disconnect in the story being used, between these two kind of paradigms of like, we can grab this stuff and back engineer it, and it's also angels and demons. And also weird too, because there's a lot of like reframing these theories as if they're new, and just totally like erasing like all of history and like then and the massive popular, I mean, most UFO material is pulp writing, is paperbacks, and like I can only think of maybe a handful, like literally like maybe under 5 published that were before 2017 that were actual kind of scholarly attempts or academic attempts, maybe 10. And it's just very odd because there's so much material out there, like this angel thing. I randomly opened a Brad Steiger book and it was in there, but Brad was a lot more like, Brad's writing for a popular audience and he's still more careful with his language and his framing than like just this kind of like blunt force conversation about it. But it's just weird because I mean, there's this whole thing about bringing academic in and scholarship and legitimate science, but it's just this conversation is just so goofy. Like it's so.
Well, that's the thing though, Dave. Is the conversation has been hijacked again.
Yeah.
It's really become conspiratainment. That's who's taking over the conversation.
Yeah.
So all you're going to get is people that want to do crappy alien. What was that TV show? Ancient Aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people have aspirations to turn this into some sort of like cottage industry or even better. And when that happens to something, the conversation is over. It's just over.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what's happened here. It's like I've seen this happen so many times to different things that I've been interested in that I've had to walk away in disgust. I mean, people forget that George Hansen's book was primarily a UFO book.
Yeah. Yeah.
But people don't talk about that anymore. And,
George, and the recent thing with the ultra terrestrials and that, where Hal Puthoff had written a kind of like a thought experiment literature review. But then, in like some of the current like interviews and that with other people who are excited for this, science finally tackling the subject. I'm
not.
Yeah, well, but also, I mean, you can go back to like Look magazine in like the 60s and science is tackling the subject. Like it's not, even that's not new. But, Puthoff had written this kind of think piece and now he's getting credited with the ultra terrestrial thing. And, I mean, it's like, okay, what? Like, why? I mean, it's, with the way media is now, it's so easy not to do that. And it's so obvious when it is
just
done.
Type it in and Valet will clearly be the first thing that appears,
Yeah, I mean, Valet and Keel, like
yeah.
Mac Tonnies, who wrote the crypto-terrestrial book.
Yep.
I mean, there's a long pedigree here. And you can go back to, Fate magazine or Mead Lane and like some of the Borderland stuff. Like, none of this is new. And they were thinking a lot about it, at least more creatively, and more interesting and probably more valid to what the phenomena actually is versus, this other stuff, which is just this weird, contemporary framing that denatures everything.
Well, that's the conversation over and over and over again about things. Is this what people forget is that this is largely a mythopoetic phenomenon.
Yeah.
And if you don't talk about it as a mythopoetic phenomena, you lose a handle, and you're not talking about it anymore. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things. Like when Hanson's book Trickster and the Paranormal came out, and Dave, Dave turned me on to that. That was 2015 or something, 2014 when that came out. The thing that grabbed me the most was when he was talking about you can't talk about this stuff directly. You have to sneak upon it sideways, because that was my experience to this phenomena in investigating it. You can't just talk about it in mechanical terms, because it's not a mechanical phenomena. And if you try to talk about it in mechanical terms, you'll miss the point, and you won't be talking about it anymore.
Yeah.
And see, that's where we've disconnected in this public conversation. Is they're trying to have what they know. It's what they know how to do. They're trying to have this mechanistic conversation about something that avoids mechanistic conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, it's a bit like we were talking about this the other day on Facebook, I think, weren't we? Where the minute academics get their claws into stuff like this, it starts to it kind of depoeticizes the kind of subject, doesn't it? And it kind of makes the thing boring, frankly. You know, it's kind of and also it leads to a level of controlling the subject as well. This is what me and Dave were talking about, which is like the minute the academics have it and they can kind of classify it, you end up with this kind of, you can't talk about it in the ways you used to talk about it now without having to refer via this kind of academic, categorization. And it's
because talking about it in the mechanistic scientific terminology decontextualizes it. It absolutely does. And so you're not talking about anything anymore. You're just babbling words.
Well, I think too there's a huge difference between academic and scholarly. I mean, to be academic is not necessarily to be scholarly. Academic is publishing papers in the right journals. It's an industry. It's a career path. It's very specific things. You can only talk about things in specific ways that can be referenced and peer reviewed. And there's so many checks in which the public doesn't know unless you actually have interaction with higher ed and realize the difference between scholars within academia and academia itself. I mean, you can see that in, some of the presentations at conferences and stuff that have come up where, people are trying to look at UFOs through Foucault. Why? I mean, read Foucault, digest it, understand that, but we don't, what is that? Okay. I mean, you can do that, I guess, if you're going to publish a paper on it, but does that have anything to do with the actual phenomena? I mean, there's insights to be derived there, but it's not, I mean.
Well, the elephant in the room here is academics largely are just trying to get published, and they're trying to advance their career. They're careerists, right? And so you're not getting anything useful out of them usually, and they're really dishonest. I mean, that's a very dishonest field. Like it's like the entertainment industry. It's like people will stab each other in the back and climb over the bodies just to publish. And to be recognized for publishing. That's it. They're looking for tenure, dude. They don't care about actually, examining the phenomena that they're talking about at all. They care about like getting accolades, period. And so when you start talking in those terms, you stop having a conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, that's not the case with everyone. I mean, obviously there's some good.
But a lot of them.
but that's the problem is like there's good folks in it now, but once it gets into the machine of academia, the more that it does that, the more it's going to get churned into this just like kind of nutrition deprived much.
Well, the machine demands it, so like because it's like capitalism. It's the same thing. Machine demands a certain type of behavior to succeed, and therefore it encourages that behavior, and that behavior, predominance is predominant. And so that's what we get at academia as well. That's what we get in entertainment. That's what we get in this stupid conversation that everybody's having, or a non-conversation is happening around the UAP.
Yeah,
it's totally become a non-conversation. That's why people like Grush can sneak in there, because he fits the profile.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe that's? I'm sort of making a bit of a leap here, but in the past we've spoken about how the occult world seems to be moving towards Kenneth Grant a lot more at the moment. Do you think because so many people have probed Crowley so much now, and it's become it's very academic, isn't it? But it's very dry. If you look at books on Crowley, they're very dry now. They're very kind of prescriptive and very kind of, this is what he said. It's very much like that. So it actually becomes quite boring, I think, and kind of slightly impenetrable for people because it's been so overly academicized. Whereas, is that even a word? Overly academic?
Yeah, well, it is now.
It is now. But whereas something like Kenneth Grant, which comes from the kind of the shadows almost, don't you? And you see it as well with like Left Hand Path, traditional magic. You see all this kind of stuff sort of really popping off at the moment in terms of like what people are interested in. And I wonder if that's just because it hasn't been probed so much and hasn't been dried out so much like Crowley has. I don't know.
I think people like Grant and Spare took great pains to make sure that their stuff couldn't be probed to death.
Yeah, I mean, especially Spare, just abandoned society.
Yeah.
I'm gonna live in a bombed out house with cats and like just have my visions and paint, and like,
right on. What better life,
Yeah, Well, I mean, it's interesting with like, I think that Grant has been academicized to a certain extent. I mean, when Folger first started putting out the Spare editions, that was kind of the first iteration of Grant and Spare, and that being categorized in a certain way. But a lot of those people that were writing about it in an academic adjacent way were still coming out of kind of the occult counterculture. Some of that early stuff. I mean, one of the guys played with Coil and stuff, and he wrote some of that. I forget whatever.
Yeah, I've got his name now.
Yeah, so I mean, they were coming from like a little bit different kind of angle, but now it just becomes this sort of. But and that like with Spare, that initial round, which with framing him as this chaos magician and whatever, Spare was a spiritualist. Like if you look at what he was doing, he was a theosophical spiritualist that just happened to have a very and maybe purported contact with independent practitioners, his initiation in that with the woman, but that's all spiritualism. That's all the early 20th century occultism and that kind of stuff, that mail order magic kind of stuff, which he did. I mean, he was selling tarot cards and betting cards and stuff like that, so he was in a different milieu, and he gets framed once Folger comes out, or even maybe in like I think 70s.
Grant was responsible for that, actually. Grant kind of pulled him into the Thelemic world, didn't it? It sort of because I think Kenneth Grant and Steffi were part of the art scene of kind of London at the time, sort of thing. So they were kind of movers and shakers in that. It was very much like a subculture at the time, and they were players in that. And I think Steffi Grant was a big fan of Spare's work, and she introduced Kenneth Grant to Spare, and Grant then kind of spoke about him a lot in his books, and I think that's kind of how he got dragged into the Western esoteric tradition rather than so it's interesting.
And then that's reified once we start writing about it in essays and critical stuff, and then now we're in like the next round of that where like it's going to even get more, because I mean, how do you approach Grant stuff?
It's impossible. I love it. It's great.
I approach it like art and poetry. I approach it exactly like that.
And I think that's what he did to an extent as well. If you read Grant's stuff, he's very much about the art, isn't he? There's no real kind of. I mean, there's a few, but he's not like Crowley where he's prescribing a system and I think he's just assuming you already know Crowley's stuff, and he's building on top of that with mythology rather than prescribing kind of new rituals like this is the new Gnostic Mass or this is the Typhon. It's kind of
Although he did do the lamb mass, right? Like he did do the lamb working, like he did develop that into a thing,
but it's not like there's not like books and books and books of like how to do a ritual kind of thing. It's usually it's sort of all wrapped in story and art and things like, which kind of is what makes him interesting to me, actually, I think.
Well, I mean, that's when a lot of this stuff goes off the rails with and I'm sure some people have good intentions when they're like, oh, we're going to academicize this, or we're going to give it an academic treatment so we can make it respectable. It's like when art becomes respectable, it becomes toothless.
Yeah.
It's like art has to be primal, wild, and not respectable. And as soon as you try to make it respectable, you kill it. And, my friend Diane DePrima told me once, we had this conversation, and she said, you should actually be thankful for these people because they're forced you to move forward. That's what she told me. She said you have to be like an acrobat and keep moving forward, because otherwise you'll sit on your ass and get lazy. I'm like, you're right. It's still annoying, but she was right.
It provides good bibliographies too.
Yeah,
it's a nice. You can go through it and just look at the bibliography and be like, oh, here's a primary text I can look at.
Well, see, I think this UAP thing and all this garbage that's being piled on top of it, hopefully this will allow people to move forward.
Yeah.
Into better, is something new, because we need something new.
Yeah.
I mean, face it, we do. We need something new. So hopefully this will force the hand.
I mean, it brings me to only read things like pre-1990, and like just to go back and look at stuff like Brad Steiger and that, and like kind of tease it out. I mean, Brad Steiger, he's a popular author. If you look at his stuff, it looks very like pop audience, but if you actually look at his career, he was adjacent to SRI and the psychic, psychic warfare programs and that. He includes Jean Houston and her husband, some of their channeling of Sekhmet that they did in the 60s. Jean Houston and her husband, Masters, I forget what, Robert Masters or something like that. They'd actually worked on the Apollo missions in using hypnosis to try to bring memories back from the astronauts when they came back. And at the time, they were also doing studies in channeling and, mediumship and embodiment. And Brad Steiger writes about that in Gods of Aquarius. And so like this popular author actually was sitting in this like hotbed of experimentation and think tanks and all the rest of it, while digesting that and producing his own work. But then he also primarily gets published later in life by Timothy Green Beckley, and so like he's in both worlds. He's in the world of like just complete exploitation, like, madness, like, Aquarian, Atlantis, UFOs and stuff like that, but then also in this other world. And I think that's really interesting. Some of the folks that ended up with the Institute of Noetic Science, the guy's name is John White. There's Edgar Mitchell put out Psychic Explorations, which is kind of like an anthology of all the early 70s psychic research that would then like kind of play out in the psychic weaponization program. Steiger and White wrote one called The Reality Game, which is like all of the meat that was going into those things. The psychic exploration is a very scientific, academic-y kind of take on it, but this other anthology that Steiger oversaw was kind of like the weird underbelly of all that stuff that was creeping in. It's got like a section from Steiner, it's got Leary in it, it's got Ballet in it, and some other stuff that wasn't part of the public face of the psychic programs, but definitely like played in the background of the culture in that. So I think that with this current like you're saying, Joe, like this wall that's put up by the kind of like conversation around UFOs right now, stepping back and looking back at this other stuff, which is much more interesting.
Well, yeah, because I think when you take it out of the context of pure art, which doesn't mean that you have to open your mind so far that everything falls in and everything falls out. You can have a good solid conversation that includes art and poetry, right? And there should be a balance to it. That's why I appreciate people like Beckley. Like Beckley I don't think people understand him as much as they should. Beckley was kind of almost like a trauma person, like with his taste. Beckley was the first person to carry the Ong's Hat CD-ROM in his catalog in like '99. He called me up and he's like, dude, I want to put this in my catalog. I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah, Commander X. Wink, wink. Because I was a huge fan of this stuff. But people forget like where all this came from. This all came from pulp.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Parsons.
Yeah.
Parsons was a member of a science fiction club.
Yeah.
That's how he met Hubbard. It's like all of this stuff was swirling around together at one time. And there's all this separate. This happens with every movement. If you notice, it's like I remember the early days of punk, and I'm an old person, so hey, I remember the early punk shows that I would go to, and I'm talking like early '80s. There would be a little bit of everybody there. There'd be Rastas there. There'd be the beginnings of the goth people there. There'd be hardcore people, skaters, just everybody. It was just a mixture of everybody. And then all of a sudden, like mid '80s, getting into the late '80s, you started to see all this segregation. It's like, no, we're the hardcore upside down. You started to get the straight edge skater hardcore punk, and then came the straight edge skater hardcore punk racist, and then that's when all that stuff started. But that stuff did not exist in the beginning. It was just like this big hodgepodge of we're into punk music and we're all here.
Yeah.
And everybody got along. I mean, one or two fights, but that's gonna happen. But nobody was fighting because of the color of the skin,
No. And actually, they had one of the earlier bands was a black band. Was it? What were they called? What was the early? They were like a earlier punk band, all black punk band. Big Bad Brains, is it?
Oh, Bad Brains. Yeah.
That was kind of unthinkable if you think about like the metal scene or any other scene around that time.
That would not happen today.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's like. So punk was this super kind of inclusive thing, wasn't it, back then? And then
back then, dude, I'd go to a show back then, and there would be a reggae band would open for a punk band, and nobody thought anything of it, and everybody was like dancing to the music, or jumping up and down, or whatever they were doing.
Yeah, it was the Washington in America at least. It was Washington guys, wasn't it? They're really kind of
DC. So the DC.
Yeah, it was like Big Black and what's the other one? Minor Threat.
Well, Big Black was Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, not Big Black.
Yeah.
Who am I thinking of?
Black Flag.
Black Flag. That's it. Yeah, Black Flag. It was those two that kind of started that off the hardcore thing, and that really split the punk thing down the middle, didn't it? It was like before that, it was kind of, I guess, Sex Pistols-y type stuff, or or the Ramones, that sort of thing, and then all of a sudden you have like hardcore.
But also, I mean, like the CBGB stuff, like that's super diverse. What I mean? There's like
that's all that was.
Yeah, that was. I mean, like television and all the other ones.
I was one of those people that, at 18 years old, made my mecca to CBGBs.
I've never been there.
It's gone now.
It's gone now. It's a clothing store now.
Oh right.
and they put glass over the walls. So you can see the graffiti.
All right. So it's,
that's that. I think there's the image right there. That's
right.
That's it. That's
like when I went to see a Fluxus show in San Francisco in early '90s, maybe I went to see a Fluxus show and everything was behind glass.
Yeah.
And I was like, what?
Yeah.
It reminds me of. There's a Banksy picture outside a pub here in Brighton, like a quite famous one. And
glass.
What people don't realize is, it's behind glass. But what actually happened was that they pulled the wall out because it's worth so much money, replaced the wall, put a fake version of the Banksy up and put that behind glass. So there's a fake version of a Banksy behind glass that people, it's like, I don't get it. I guess to stop people drawing on it or trying to steal it. But you literally... People would like rip the walls out for Banksy's artwork in the UK. I don't know if they do it elsewhere, but it's kind of insane. Yeah. This whole behind glass thing is a bit.
I remember when the only time you would hear about Banksy is in publications like a Joda, which is Anarchy, a Journal of Desire Armed. It's basically a situationist or anarchist journal in the early 90s. And that's the only place you wouldn't hear about Banksy in the art world. You'd hear about Banksy in the anarchist journals, Fifth Estate, some of the things like that. And then all of a sudden everybody was talking about Banksy. I'm like, what? How did he get popular?
And there was in the UK that the street art scene was kind of big at that point, I suppose. And there was a war between Banksy and this other guy. Have you heard about this? And
yeah.
I can't remember his name. The other guy, he died. But there's this particular spot where they draw over each other's art the whole time. So all these priceless pieces of art just being smashed apart by the other artist. And it's and I think that's still there because he died, and then Banksy kind of gave in and drew a memorial picture there. It's in Camden, I think, in London. But yeah, it's interesting, art wars. Yeah, it's kind of strange.
Well, I mean Banksy isn't the first one. Basquiat was started as a guy that wrote on walls. And then people started stealing the walls.
Yeah.
What do you call it? Samo. That's what he called himself back then. Samo. He had a SAMO. Was a.
Oh yeah, he's the guy. He died young as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. His stuff's really good. I like his stuff.
I love his stuff, man. He's got a piece here at the museum at the university. That's this gigantic wall, and it's this conspiracy screed. With all this stuff about 666, it kind of sounds like King Kill, kind of that kind of writing, and he wrote all this crazy stuff, and then they painted around it, and it's I think it's monstrous, and somehow we got it here in Oregon, so it's in the library or in the museum at the university. We have a pretty good museum here for a small town.
I'm trying to think of the name of the guy. There's one thing I was going to ask you too about what you thought about it, but I've forgotten his name now. Who's the kind of conspiracy guy that Adam Parfrey was publishing that no one really knew if he actually existed or not? He looks a bit
Shelby Downard.
Yeah, Downard. Yeah.
With King Kill,
yeah.
What do you think of? Yeah, what do you think of Downard, and the kind of mythology around him, kind of thing? I've always been interested in. He sort of keeps appearing in my radar.
Well, he was kind of a group project, Parfrey, Adam Gorightly, and some other folks. I think there actually was a Downard. I mean, Penny Royal, what's his name, has been looking into a lot of that.
Nathan, Nathan,
and getting that. And I think Gorightly just released the biography or I don't know. There was some other extra Downard thing.
Yeah, I think he did. I think he did a biography piece.
Yeah, so he's an interesting kind of mix and match of mythologizing this guy that actually existed that wrote some weird stuff. I mean, there's archival materials and birth records and relatives and stuff like that. Very much
tapes, aren't there? There's recordings of him speaking.
Yeah.
Rising or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny too because the doubts around his existence were there because all that stuff is easily faked, as Joe showed through On's hat. I think On's hat kind of set people up to be like, well, wait a second, this may not be actually a real human, But Parfrey really wasn't one to play games like that, I mean, he had his thing, but he wasn't he was more into publishing way outside stuff than he was into creating.
He wasn't into doing the trickster thing. He was more into being the controversial thing.
Yeah.
And selling trinkets. I won't forget that time I went to see the Process movie with Timothy Wiley and him, and Parfrey was there. And Parfrey was there, and I was sitting in the front row wearing my homemade Process T-shirt, and he started ranting and raving about that 4P2 thing that I did. I guess he didn't know I hadn't told anybody I'd done it yet. Somebody at what's his name? What was that? Fenris Wolf. Carl
Abrahamson.
Yeah. Somebody at Carl Abrahamson's publication wrote a piece about the fact that it was me. And that's fine. I was done with it by then. But yeah, he was like just screaming and ranting and raving, and I'm just sitting there laughing. And then all of a sudden he goes, "Oh, and by the way, we have process rings and T-shirts for sale in the lobby." And I'm just like, "Oh God."
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
Timothy Wiley was a character. We interviewed him.
Yeah.
He was more interested in talking about, because he had a book. Parfrey put his process book out.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it's called. Final Judgment of the Process, something like that.
Process Church of the Final Judgment.
That's it. Yeah. So we interviewed him when that came out.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, but he was way more interested in talking about
angels and dolphins.
Dolphins and ketamine.
Yeah.
That's what I want to hear about. I mean, like, I got he has like some ET, non-human intelligence communication with dolphins, and oh, amazing!
And angels.
Like, that's what I want.
Well, that's why I contacted him. Like he and I corresponded by email for a while, and that's all I wanted to talk about the non-human intelligence stuff.
Yeah.
It's actually really interesting. Like, and he had like a really developed kind of worldview that like spun around that went into. Did he do Oishpay? Didn't he end up like kind of adding in like some Oishpay stuff and like
I don't know,
apocalypticism? There was some kind of like
I don't remember that.
No, it was published. So there's somebody who Inner Traditions published as a writer writing about kind of like the New Age transition or whatever, but through like an Oishpay lens. And then it was publishing that around the same time that Wiley's books that were published by him about the fallen angels returning, but like in a good way through dolphins and communication and stuff. So it was sort of a mix and match. It's getting matched up in my head, but yeah, that stuff's really interesting.
Timothy he reminded me a lot of Toby Terrell, who I talked to from the Finders. Yeah. The two of them were very similar spirits, both enjoyable people that I loved talking to. But Wiley, I told him about the meta machine stuff, and like I think why couldn't this be a vessel for a discarnate spirit? And he agreed with me. He's like, yeah, no, there's no reason it couldn't be.
Yeah.
He's like, we're just talking about vessels and means of communication, but it doesn't have to be a dolphin, doesn't necessarily have to be an angel. So yeah, Timothy was a cool guy, and I think he wrote the process book as a way just to get it off his chest and say, okay, we've done it now. Can we move on?
Yeah. He did a book with, I want to say he did a book with Doreen Virtue on like angel languages. And it's one of those ones you would see in like the like front racks at a bookstore, like a gift book kind of thing, like how to talk to your angels. I thought it was amazing. Like just to know the back end of that book. And then to see this kind of like gift book presentation of like the angel communication stuff, I was like, I love that kind of thing. I love when like, you've got this figure who like, if people actually knew what they were picking up when they picked up the, Angels Among Us book or whatever, they would not necessarily feel as comfortable with it. But here it is.
Well, that's how you get it into the mainstream, man.
Yeah, I love that.
Make it simple and accessible and gifty.
Yeah. Brad Steiger did that with a lot of stuff where he did, kind of like a both. He would do weirder ones, and then he would also do kind of like your psychic pet, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, you can use it for good or bad. I mean, I think the Ramtha people use that to less good end, but because that stuff all sounds like Hallmark greeting card shit to me.
Yeah,
Read what Ramtha says. It's like he sounds like a Hallmark greeting card, but that works. That obviously look how big that thing got.
Yeah, I mean that's the selling point. That's what people just want, the warm fuzzy. A lot of people do.
Everybody wants the little calendar they can put on their desk and a saying a day. That's what they want.
You should have an Ong's Hat calendar, a saying a day.
Yeah, I'm kind of like when I finish this current book that I'm working on about Ong's Hat, I'm kind of done with Ong's Hats.
The current book that will have a desk calendar and a keychain along with it, and it's released.
Why not?
Just go. That's what I'm saying. The keychain would be that the Ong's Hat, the famous Ong's Hat sign, right? It's done. Like you've already got all of it.
Bumper stickers,
cushions,
all of that shit. Yeah.
I saw some bumper stickers yesterday that it like twisted my brain in a knot. There was the City of Lights edition of Howl, Allen Ginsberg's poem, has very iconic typography. And so one of the bumper stickers was a huge thing that said Howl, right? And it was in that iconography or typography. And then right next to it, it said "Stand for Science," and I was like, "That's amazing!" Yeah. It was just the most. I was like, "This is the most NPR like bumper sticker combo I've ever seen in my life." Like,
I have to hold this sideways to understand it.
Yeah, like Allen Ginsberg in the poem, literally talking about William Blake, who writes the anti-Newton, anti-Locke thing. And then you have right next to that "Stand for Science," and I was like, "This is amazing." Like, I don't think Allen Ginsberg stood for science, like, at all. I mean, like,
well, see,
maybe like empirical.
Great observation about, or example of what we were talking about earlier in the conversation. It's like you can't take these two things and make them fit.
Yeah,
it's like you can't force oil into water. It doesn't. It doesn't disperse. Yeah, it doesn't happen.
It's not going to work. Yeah, it was so good. And they were in front of me for a little bit, so I just had this like beautiful moment while I was driving of just like the two worlds that should never like be displayed.
Yeah, I probably would have driven off the road. I'd be like, what?
I was wondering what else they had. I was like, what other amazing combinations exist on the back? Because there's a lot of stickers. Those were the only two ones that were like really like popping out. It was a good moment.
Yeah, but that's the great thing is like when things get to that level, to that point, that we're done with them and we can move on.
Yeah, that's the ultimate point of commodification, where they can exist together comfortably without any any thought to actually what. And that's the weird thing. It's like, did you read the poem that you got the sticker on? Because there's nothing in Howl that's going to make you say "Stand for Science." Like,
exactly.
You like it enough that you have a big sticker on your car, but I mean, do you understand what you read? Because that's not
burn down the academy.
They might have just not read it and just like the typography.
Yeah,
maybe they thought it was
not. They don't.
Maybe they thought it was like the Wild Yawp. It was like the Whitman's Wild Yawp, and just that's all it was. It was just Howl. That's it. Yeah,
everybody wants to get the the condensed version, the Reader's Digest condensed version of everything. If there even is a Reader's Digest anymore, I don't know, but
it's so profitable. I can't imagine there isn't. I mean, those, you see them like all over the place in like thrift stores and stuff, like the amount of Reader's Digest versions that have been put out.
But I don't think people even read the digested version of anything anymore.
No, it's rare. I mean, we're in an age where that is not the focus.
I mean, speaking of Ong's Hat, a great example is like, does anybody in the last 10 years even read Ong's Hat? No. Do they know it as a meme? Yes.
Yeah.
So,
but in order to be the meme, you need the content. That's the weird thing.
Yeah.
It's like any of these memes to exist, you need the thing that most people don't interact with to give it weight, to give it some kind of like body to it, to make it interact, and I think people forget that. They try to make memes first, and like try to like have some mimetic like thing, but if it doesn't have that weight in culture, I mean, that's the UFOs is a great example. This desire for disclosure and all this stuff, where if you look at the data on public reception of UFOs, it's always tied to an event that the public sees and interacts with. It's never tied with an official being like, these things are out there, or our military captured this on a camera. It's people in the streets going, whoa, what is that? And then other people going, hey, what was that? I saw that too. Or a police officer, someone closer to the community, and so it's trying to force it and trying to force, like we've got congressional action because they pay attention to the academics and, and that kind of thing. But the public doesn't. And so in order for the public to react to it, they actually need to experience it on some level or have a peer experience it, which is not happening. There's no flaps. There's no, like the 1952 with all the UFOs over Washington, D.C. We've got none of that. We have isolated gun camera footage, and that's not enough to sell the public,
Yeah, I remember there was a flap in the 70s too, because that's when I got involved when I was a kid.
Yeah,
there were every grocery store had UFO books at the checkout counter.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting because there's two things to that. Like there was a massive flap in the 70s, 1973. CUFOS, which was Hynek's organization, has a wonderful document called Year of the Humanoid, 1973, because there was this massive wave of humanoid sightings. Yep. But one of the funny things was that the skeptical, there had been an attempt to kind of map out the flap dynamics, right? Like when are we going to have these things? And so to kind of analyze frequency and see like when are these things, is there some sort of periodicity to when these happen? And the skeptics were like, oh, look, like your periodicity doesn't work because I think it was like a year off, and so like they were like, well, see, like it didn't happen, like this is wrong. And then literally like the next year it was like boom, like this massive humanoid sightings, like this whole thing. And it was just this hilarious moment of like the beauty of the UFO thing where you've got skeptics and believers, both of them like presenting these ideas, but then the phenomena creeps in with something even weirder and like more, because the idea of the flaps isn't humanoids, right? It's not actually encountering UFO nuts, it's just seeing stuff in the skies. But here there were this massive wave of that.
Hynek put out that book. I read it when it came out. I was like in the 5th grade, I think, when he put out that book, Close Encounters, where he where he outlines the Close Encounters of the first kind, second kind, third, and then that was before Spielberg's movie. But that was about I want to say 70. Again, I'm dating myself, but it's probably late early 70s. Because I remember I was like 5th, 6th grade when it came out, because I was devouring UFO books at that age for some reason.
Well, it's interesting too because you got Leary in the late 60s has a starseed transmission, or was that 70, 71? I don't know.
Somewhere in there.
71, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Stephen Halpern's out in the Redwoods. He has his download that brings him New Age music, right? Like what becomes New Age music. And he then starts working with Stan Krippner, doing research into healing modalities with sound and this whole thing, and that all like branches out. And you've got all these different like little weird kind of like UFO related things that don't fit into the narrative of the UFO that we know really, but that like were really influential in culture and all had to do with people thinking about contact with non-human intelligences.
Robert Anton Wilson would be another one, wouldn't it? I mean,
Wilson, Cosmic Trigger,
and that was part of the starseed transmission stuff.
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff that Leary writes in a book called Neuropolitics about UFOs and that, which later get sort of repeated in some of the stuff that Diana writes about in American Cosmic, which is where I started looking at this sort of like weird thread, that and like the starseed narrative, which became big in the U.S. after the January 6th thing. You had these journalists going out trying to figure out like where did starseed start, and they didn't do a good job of it. But if you actually track like that idea of walk-ins and the idea that there's these that we could be aliens in disguise or something like that, that actually goes back to 1947 and beyond. Within the UFO narrative, like not just Theosophy and the rest of it, but there's a lot of like interesting stuff to kind of dig out there, and how this stuff is spread.
It's funny you should say Theosophy. I was just talking to Dave about Theosophy before you appeared, Joe. Like, did you notice the TikTok drama that happened recently with these two? I don't know what you'd call them really. One's a twin flamer, and the other one's what did we say it was? A spiritual hospital owner.
Yeah, spiritual hospital.
I so don't keep up with TikTok.
So it appears that one TikToker, this girl called Keisha the Mystic, that's her username, was claiming that she was being, I guess, sexually assaulted on the astral plane by another TikTok personality. And at first she didn't reveal who this was, and she's going on about, and there's some great stuff she says, like he implanted spiritual technology into her energy field to bind her, and all this. It's all very intense stuff, and she's
This isn't new stuff, dude. This isn't new stuff.
No, but it's new for TikTok.
Yeah.
And it's the ability to be able to watch it in real time is what kind of makes it interesting to me, because there's this kind of conversation and this feedback loop that happens with all the people, because obviously when you do a TikTok, I'm old as well, so I don't really get TikTok. I don't understand really how it works, but I was alerted to this by someone else, and so people will take the original video and then they'll make their own video over the top of it, and so this whole kind of dialogue starts up.
Talmudic.
It's really strange, and it's like this whole spiritual TikTok community all kind of like gang on this particular person without really knowing who this person is, and then it's quite funny that this person gets revealed by the original TikToker, and obviously he's like, well, hang on, you're accusing me of like sexually abusing you on the astral plane, but what you've actually done is you've kind of turned thousands of people against me in the real world, and it's kind of like he said,
it's the witchcraft dynamic. I mean, that's totally the witchcraft dynamic. I mean, that's what, it's really interesting to see people, because the idea of the witch and that has been like sort of like appropriated by identity and sort of like a, like a counterculture kind of thing. But the actual witchcraft, when you have it in a culture, this is what happens, right? Like, I mean, it's witch burning. That's a witch hunt. Like, that's exactly what happens. People get super paranoid that you're casting spells on them, or that somebody else is casting a spell, or this thing that I saw was an omen, which meant so-and-so did something to me, and then paranoia, talk amongst themselves, pinpoint, find the witch, and then destroy the witch. And this is exactly what happens when, we were talking before this, Joe, but, in prior to digital, where and Ken, you were talking about this here with this sort of feedback loop that like flips. Prior to digital, all this stuff was like, at least you had to go to the bookstore, if not like, actually contact somebody, get it in the mail. I mean, there were some checks and balances, but we now have these things being just streamed mainline, right? And it's producing the same kind of effects as the witch hunts of past days. It's really, I mean, if the skeptics are right about anything, it was that maybe 100% of the culture doesn't need this stuff. I mean, like maybe there needs to be some sort.
I'm on board with that one, dude.
I mean, because it's just it produces madness and paranoia and hate and that kind of thing. Because the thing with anything that has to do with this stuff that you can't see it,
well, and then a lot of times these people that are projecting these things are not self-aware enough to know where it's coming from. So a good example, I was accused of sexually assaulting somebody in their dreams. And I said, really? Like, seriously, do you believe that? And then this woman had like 3 dudes online who were like, no, you could be doing it and you wouldn't even know it. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
You're supporting this crap? And what it really boiled down to would and then when I told them that, they had another reason, but I said, this woman expressed romantic interest in me. I've never met her, but she said she'd met me in her dreams and that we should be together. And I said, maybe not, and then she became angry and hurt and started screaming about, he's attacking me in my dreams. And then she has like these 3, I don't know what you would call them, like white knights, I guess, like idiots, like jump on board and are supporting her in this. And I'm like, dude, you're enabling a really mentally ill person. Do you not get that? And then no.
Well, it's mystical psychosis, isn't it? In a way, it's basically what it is. I mean, that's the thing that struck. Well, that's the thing that struck me when I was, it struck me literally. No, well, when I was, I sort of like, well, not researching. I was just watching all the TikToks and just thinking, what the hell? But it kind of.
Well, see, now you know why I don't go on TikTok. I did a couple times. I'm like, what the hell?
It just sort of blasts stuff at you the minute you turn the app on. It's like, it's really bizarre. Like, I was like, what do I do? What? Stop it. But no, I was like really struck by. Here's like a kind of live case of mystical psychosis. This is someone who's clearly neither of them seem like particularly bad people. I mean, some bad dress sense going on there, a lot of rug wearing and hippiness. But other than that, I'm just joking. That's fine. You can wear whatever you want. But it's
just don't wear a rug.
Yeah, but it's like clearly the accuser is having some kind of it's like Jerusalem syndrome kind of thing.
Yeah, having a crisis. Yeah.
It's like a crisis and they're sort of attaching that to a spiritual belief system, which I get the impression a lot of people, because I know someone in real life who someone in real life, but a friend of my girlfriend's is sister was joined the twin flame movement, and it kind of it really rips people apart. It's the typical classic cult stuff. It's like separate from your family. But I get the impression that this person had already been through that, and then maybe it's done something to her, and now she feels that it's a bizarre, weird thing to watch, but it's also highly interesting to watch it happen in kind of real time, and but also see how people around her kind of act as well. So it's almost like her influence group or a bubble or whatever. They still, even though this guy's come out and said, "Look, this is crazy. We've never met in real life." It's defamation essentially. What you're saying,
dude. This twin flame thing has been going on for a while, because I saw people talking about it online in the '90s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh well, yeah. I think it comes out of Elizabeth Clare Prophet.
Yep. And then other people picked it up, like
a few years ago.
Cassiopeia and Laura Knight was talking about that crap, and then they have like all this other, somebody once explained it to me, who again was a woman who's told me that we had met in dreams, and I'm like, no, we didn't. But I said, explain this to me, and she explained it to me that there was and this kind of sounds Scientology. There was like a period of time where you were part of the same soul as this other person.
Yeah.
And then fragmentation happened, and you are a soul sliver. And you can be a soul sliver of, it sounds like the Thetan thing. You can be a soul sliver of several people, can be the soul sliver of a same original entity. So they're all attached because they all know each other because they used to be the same person. It's some crazy shit. And once again, I was being accused of having sex with somebody in their dreams. And I said, no, we're not doing that one again.
I know that what happened recently was that there was a couple that appeared online on YouTube, I think, and they kind of kickstarted a actual twin flame cult, a proper cult. So, and what it was basically doing, I think there's a Netflix series about it at the moment, or it came out recently. But
I think I've seen it, or seen it mentioned.
Oh, Mother God? Are you talking about the Mother God one, where
it's about this cult.
Isn't it called Twin Flame Cult or Twin?
Yeah, like that. It's something like that. But there was also a really good series. It's like an NPR style kind of like audio series that came out a few years ago. That's where I first kind of really heard about it. Oh, yeah, Dave.
We lost Dave. This stuff has never gone away. It's like people. The only thing that's happened is like this used to be the stuff that we encountered in our highly rarefied fringe scene. Because we've all seen it before, but we were like over here in the fringe scene, like it wasn't the whole world, and now it's on TikTok and Netflix and like places like this stuff keeps growing up and becoming adult.
It's the same as conspiracy theory, isn't it? It's that's kind of done the same thing where it's gone mainstream, and like middle-aged Karen types are suddenly talking about reptilian Nephilim. Stuff.
That's why when people were asking me about the QAnon stuff and like, don't you feel bad that you gave him the tools to start that thing? I'm like, no, I didn't give him the tools, but none of this stuff is real anyway, or new anyway. This is like all the same old rehash shit from the 90s.
Yeah. The weird thing it was
from the 70s and from the 60s.
Well, even exactly, the 50s and 40s and. Yeah.
But the interesting thing about the twin flame cult thing was basically this couple that kind of ran the group or whatever. They were essentially training men and women to become stalkers essentially. So basically their thing was you would your twin flame, you had to be with them. It wasn't like it wasn't an option. It was this is the person you are meant to be with, and you will do whatever you can do.
You have to find them and convince them.
Yeah, and it literally and what would happen is that members would go back. They'd have these kind of like almost like therapy sessions, like meetings, like group meetings, essentially. I think often they'd be online, a bit like this, kind of like where there's, but they go back and say that he's just not interested, or he or she's not interested. There's nothing I can do, and they would actually shame the person, and say, look, you're just not trying hard enough. You're clearly not committed enough, blah, blah. And it's like you hear these terrible cases.
You have to abduct them.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, that would be, and then that would be sort of applauded as like, oh, this person's a proper twin flame, member. It's crazy stuff. It's.
Well, was it King of Comedy? Did you ever see the King of Comedy with
the De Niro film?
De Niro, yeah. Did you ever see that when Sandra Bernhardt kidnaps Jerry Lewis?
I don't remember that bit.
Yeah, he's like the talk show host.
Oh yeah.
And then she like wraps him in duct tape.
Yeah.
That's what they advocate.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. And it's, but yeah, I find it fascinating that. But this almost goes back to the thing you were saying earlier. Like that was a big red flag, that twin flame stuff, and that all it seemed to do was bring misery to people. Really, I mean, you probably got a couple of fringe cases where people actually got together and it was a great, like a great kind of test case or like example. Yeah. But the fact that it's now mutated and it's sort of become. It's not, on TikTok. There's like people that are twin flamers now. Like they're not part of that cult, but they're sort of using the technology that cult created somehow, and they're not learning from it. If
you know the origin of that myth, it's just fucking Scientology, dude. It's like there's it's the Thetan theory. It's that. I wouldn't doubt that it came from that, or that came from they have similar origins. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
California.
Because Hubbard didn't make that stuff up either. Like he didn't make any of that stuff up. So he was just picking and choosing.
Yeah. True.
California. Blame it on California.
Yeah. Well, blame it on California.
But you guys ever hear of?
Did you ever hear of the I Am cult before?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was
Chicago has right downtown Chicago. At least they did. I don't know if it's still there, but there's a big kind of headquarters of I Am, or maybe it's an outpost. I don't know exactly like where it fits within the hierarchy of buildings, but I used to work right by it, and I'd pass it and was just really curious. I mean, they've got those Ascended Master art and all the rest of it, and I was wondering if they had a bookshop, and I was waiting for some folks, actually friends of George Hansen. There was like a little meetup that happened in Chicago occasionally. And I took the train in and like was waiting and had about an hour to kill. And I was like, I'm gonna go over to the I Am building and see if they got a bookstore. And I walked in and they did not have a bookstore. They were not particularly happy about visitors. I tried to look as like as innocuous as I could, but the thing is that they all wear all white, and like they're all very white and like very pale.
Well, yeah.
And
I did not fit in. That was not, I was obviously I did not belong there, and they didn't want anyone asking questions about what they were doing. And there was a guy at the desk, and I asked him if there was anything, any books or materials or whatever, and it was an amazing moment. Like you hear stories about like the inner zones after World War II, like the post-war, like Berlin, right? Mm-hmm. And you watch those great old movies where there's like characters like in the Maltese Falcon, the character played by Peter Lorre, where they're kind of like, where are you from? Like you've got some sort of accent, but it seems like an accent from everywhere. Yeah. And like you're very like particular, like you're a very like specific sort, and this guy behind the desk was that. He was like white socks, white shoes, white pants, white, like everything, just all in white, like gold jewelry, and an indiscernible European, like North African outpost accent that couldn't really be discerned, it was amazing. It was great. And I left very shortly after that.
There was an IM group in Santa Cruz that was trying to insert. Well, they did. They inserted themselves into the rave scene. I guess
that's weird.
They thought that was the perfect place to recruit.
I think they were based at Mount Shasta. I think that was their main.
There was a group in Mount Shasta. There was a group in Elizabeth Clare Prophet was kind of an offshoot of that.
Yeah.
And then
she was in Montana.
What was their shtick? It's something like they're getting the guy that started it had direct contact with the Count Saint Germain or something.
Yep,
Wasn't that it?
Yep.
Yeah, that's all I really know about it. And then there was some nasty bit. I think what's that podcast? What are they called? My brain. I tell you, my brain is frazzled this week. Guy and a Girl, good podcast. We've spoken about them before.
Oh,
Nonsense Bizarre.
Nonsense Bizarre. Yeah,
they did an episode on it.
Willow and Sequoia.
Good. Yeah, I think I'm going to listen to that episode actually because I haven't heard it yet. But I think they do a whole episode on that.
Oh, they do. I'd highly recommend their podcast. I also talk to them sometimes. They're pretty cool people too.
Yeah. They seem like good guys. But yeah, it's a lot of stuff, and including the stuff I was talking about on TikTok, and I was talking again to Dave. We were talking about this earlier. Theosophy has a lot to answer for, doesn't it, when it comes to this stuff?
Hell yeah.
It's like, it really does. I mean, a lot of this stuff is like directly, I mean, you can just trace it all back to Theosophy, all back to Blavatsky in particular.
There's a lot of the IM, a lot of stuff is offshoot of IM too, here in the United States at least. There's a lot of IM offshoot stuff.
Yeah.
That some of it is very weird. Like that Elizabeth Clare Prophet gang, those people were dangerous.
Yeah, it's like it's almost. And I was talking. We had Mark Sedgwick on the show recently on the main podcast, and talking about traditionalism, and like I'd never really thought about this before until I was talking to him. Like it almost feels like the Western esoteric tradition, so like Golden Dawn, Crowley, all this kind of stuff, almost feels like a antidote to Theosophy, doesn't it? Because if you at the sort of time the Golden Dawn appeared, Theosophy was like the dominant kind of occult thing, it was the thing kind of bringing all this stuff up, wasn't it? And the Western esoteric tradition seems like a very different thing. They do cross over at times, but
yes,
generally it felt more like an attempt to start something that wasn't.
Well, I think Golden Dawn and Theosophy kind of came out of the same impulse of that whole. There's these ascended masters in the mountains of the Himalayas, and they told me this.
It's the same with the secret chiefs, isn't it? It's the same.
Yeah, the secret chiefs. It is the origin of the secret chiefs. And if you look at the history, there's a couple good histories of the Golden Dawn. The cipher documents are crap. They're not real. They're not even very good translations. Like they don't look like they were written by somebody who spoke German.
I think someone traced them back to a group of Masons that they think were trying to push a kind of new form of occultism, essentially. And kind of essentially handed these documents over to them and said.
But some of the rituals have origin. Like they do have historical origin, and as you know, Ken, and maybe Dave, if you perform these rituals, some of them work. So that's all that matters, really. At the end of the day, who wrote the stupid documents? Who cares? Does the shit work?
Greenfield has a really good history of the Western esoteric tradition, whose title I don't remember. But tying it into stuff outside of just the orders themselves, because you've got mesmerism, right? Like plays a huge part in the origins of like the spiritualist tradition, spiritism, and the Golden Dawn stuff too, because those, like Moina Mathers was Henri Bergson's sister, right? So like you've got the Society for Psychical Research sitting right next to folks that were high up in the Golden Dawn, and so we think about that stuff as, like isolated, like these people were the Western Hermetic tradition or whatever, or Western magic tradition. But back then, like the borders and everything were a lot more hazy. I mean, people were doing a lot of seances, a lot of, like conjuring work. I mean, you think of like Frederick Hockley's mirror scrying. stuff that kind of sits outside of what looks like straight up just, Western occult tradition, that all sorts of blends together. Theosophy is interesting because it takes a more kind of pan-globalist, almost political thing. The Theosophists, there'd be no Gandhi without Theosophy. He actually regained interest in the history of India and Indian traditions because of Theosophy.
You could say things like yoga kind of came through. Gyms having yoga these days is partially the fault of Theosophy and Crowley.
Sort of. Well, kind of. Well, now yoga, like the contemporary yoga, is actually more the World Congress of Religions.
Yeah.
When you actually had like yogis from India coming over and presenting their stuff, and people started setting up ashrams and setting up and it quickly bled into. But
people wouldn't have known what it was necessarily, because Blavatsky was talking about yoga and that kind of stuff years before that. So I mean, but this was like the actual, the actual stuff. She was talking about mental yoga, but the physical. She's probably making it up, to be honest. Blavatsky made everything like so much.
Well,
stuff
a little, probably a little bit of both. It's like, which I think the Golden Dawn did. The Golden Dawn made some stuff up. Some of it's based on real tradition.
A lot of Golden Dawn and stuff and Crowley. You look at that stuff, and it's Tantra. A lot of it. It really is. It's like I've been reading about Tantra recently,
and if you look at the history of that, especially in Germany, there was some like early tantric. There was a lot of tantric and just a lot of yogic interest. Like I just the other day I watched this. I think it was 6-part. It was a limited series that was done in Germany about Bauhaus, about the origin of Bauhaus, the Bauhaus school, and they were highly influenced by yoga. Like there was a whole segment of the Bauhaus school that was way into yoga.
I wonder if that came through because before the ATO and all that kind of stuff, which is a German, pre-Crowley was a German order.
Sex magic order.
There was a group called the Pansophical Society as well, and I think they might have. And there was another one called OF. I can never remember is it OFGC or something? There was these two other groups that were clearly also influenced by that kind of stuff as well. So I think it all kind of. Probably just all bleeds in from all these different sources, doesn't it?
There's the book,
especially right after World War I. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a book on William Blake, and I forget what the title is. The title of the essay it's by Martha Schuckart, the title of the essay that was before the book is Why Mrs. Blake Cried, or something like that. And she does a great job of showing the ties between mesmeristic practices and what would look like Tantra, right, or Tantra. But we're actually just straight up from the mesmeristic tradition and their experiments in that. A lot of Blake's, like the penises have been erased out of Blake's drawings, but like a lot of the drawings of prone figures with like, emanations coming out of their mind, those were actually like images of a kind of like a sexual tantra. Kenneth Rexroth, his introduction to A.E. Waite's book on Kabbalah, actually talks a lot about the sexual elements of Kabbalah, traditional Kabbalah, not even like derivative kind of like fake Kabbalah. I don't know, like not English Kabbalah, but like actual, like Judaic practice Kabbalah.
Kabbalah with a K.
Yeah, there's a lot of sexual elements in that, and so there's Peter Kingsley, hit or miss on accuracy on some of the stuff, but definitely like the gist of the idea. But these traditions existed. I mean, they exist, and if you think about where Tantra actually comes from, a lot of it is in the Kashmir region, which was a huge trading zone between East and West. I mean, the concept that like these things were separate. I mean, there's Buddhist statues and Viking horns, right? Like, I mean, like there was communication going on and all this stuff, So it's also interesting to look at when the stuff was translated, because I think the Bhagavad Gita was translated maybe in the 1700s or 1600s. I mean, there's it's real early. You know, I mean, Emerson, Thoreau, all of them, like, they're super pumped for yoga and you know, Eastern ideas and that. So these transmissions existed, you know, pretty heavily if you were part of the literate class and able to kind of think about it. I mean, you think about the British Empire; they were just scooping stuff from everywhere. You know,
yep,
I mean,
yep.
You know, and
we know the greatest transmitter of Tantra was, of course, Sting, the Tantra master. And
I mean, really? I didn't know that.
Oh, really?
That's
how I first heard of Tantra.
Really?
When I was a kid. Yeah.
Sting, wow. Madonna.
Yeah.
I knew Madonna like was part of that
Kabbalah thing, wasn't
new agey Kabbalah crap that was going on in Hollywood. You know, but look where we are. We're right back where we started originally. It was in the beginning of a movement. It's usually all mixed up.
Yeah.
Just like, you know, punk rock, there was no differentiation between. There was no silos. Probably the same thing with Tantra and the occult. It's like in the early days when this was coming over, and Western people were learning about it, and kind of became this inner zone of mixing everything together. There was nobody said only here, the Tantra over here, and you know, said the masters over here, and no, it's just all mixed up.
Yeah, and
it was a slurry.
Well, and the one of the weird things about like Tantra, like there's a bunch of different meanings to that term, but one of the meanings is commentary, right? So it's the oral teaching that goes with the text, and the oral teaching is usually the practical stuff. Like that's one of the things that I think gets really skewed in like the digital culture. Like you've got the text, but then you need an interpretation, and the interpretation then leads to physical practices, mental practices, spiritual practices, that kind of thing.
It's like the same as initiation, isn't it? You kind of have to be in the room really and doing the thing.
Yeah, and you gotta, and you have to have that, like, you know, and there's a lot of things that seem like the main Aikido book, I forget what it's called, but if you understand what the oral teachings are behind that, the book's totally different. It looks like it's just written in haikus. And it seems really like, oh, this is about a martial arts practice, you know. But if you understand the oral teachings that go behind it, it opens it up into this, you know, sort of like weird fractal, like it just keeps spinning out and all that. And it's just from a haiku, kind of basic, right? So, well,
that's the seed, but you have to actually do things.
Yeah, you gotta have that activation. Yeah, because
what people in this culture have forgotten is that intelligence exists in everywhere in the body, not just the brain.
Yeah.
So it's everywhere, and so you have to use the entire body in order to have understanding of the entire thing.
Yeah.
To grok it, to use that term. But that term does fit. I mean, it's sci-fi and it's kind of corny and it's hippies kind of overused it, but it's really true. Ralph Abraham still uses that all the time. Corrects me up. No, you have to grok it. And I'm like, this is a mathematician telling me this. But he's right. He's right. He's not wrong.
There we go. That's probably actually quite a good place to end that one, I reckon.
Yeah.
I think we did a big circle, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. We kept coming back to, but in the beginning, it's always mixed up.
Yeah.